The ballroom glittered like a dream stitched in gold. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls, scattering light over marble floors so polished they reflected every sequin and every shadow. Laughter drifted through the air, light and hollow, mingling with the clink of glasses and the faint melody of a string quartet. Waiters in white gloves moved like ghosts, carrying trays of champagne that caught the light with every step. And somewhere between the luxury and the lies, Maria stood with her mop and bucket, invisible to everyone, the woman who scrubbed away their footprints so they could pretend their lives were spotless. She had worked here for 7 years. Every night she came after hours, when the lights dimmed and the music faded, cleaning what the rich left behind. Lipstick stains, shattered glass, forgotten secrets. But tonight she had been told to stay during the gala. Just in case. Just in case someone spilled, someone slipped, someone needed the invisible hands that kept perfection alive. Maria's back ached. Her shoes were damp and her uniform smelled faintly of bleach. Yet her eyes were alert, sharper than anyone might imagine. She had seen too much. Affairs whispered behind velvet curtains, bribes exchanged under the pretense of a toast. She learned to watch without being seen. And that's why she noticed it, the moment that would change everything. At the far end of the hall, Viktor Orlov stood by the grand piano. Surrounded by politicians and businessmen, his laugh deep and commanding. He was the kind of man who filled a room without effort. Tall, graying temples, the cold assurance of someone who had never been told no. Beside him, his wife, young, stunning, and fragile-looking, clung to his arm like jewelry. Her name was Alina. Everyone whispered about her, about how she'd married him for money, about the strange loneliness in her eyes. Maria paused her cleaning and watched as Alina leaned close to her husband, pressing her lips to his ear. Her voice was low, her expression unreadable. Then, with a slow, graceful movement, she lifted his glass of champagne. Her fingers lingered over it too long, just a second too long, before she placed it back down. Then she smiled, kissed his cheek, and drifted toward the garden doors, her eyes flicking nervously over her shoulder. Maria's stomach tightened. Something about that moment didn't feel right. She looked again, and saw it, just barely under the shimmer of the chandeliers, a faint, oily ripple at the top of Viktor's drink. It caught the light differently, unnatural. Her breath hitched. Her mind raced through memories. Her husband, gone years ago from something that looked just like that, a glass that shouldn't have been touched. Her pulse pounded in her ears. No one else noticed. No one ever noticed her. The music swelled, laughter grew louder, Viktor reached for his glass, and Maria's hands began to shake. She wiped them on her apron, heart hammering against her ribs. Should she say something? Would they believe her? Or would they throw her out like garbage for interrupting their perfect evening? And yet, when she saw Viktor's fingers curl around the stem of the glass, instinct overpowered fear. She took one trembling step forward, then another, her shoes squeaking softly against the marble. No one turned to look. No one even saw her move through the crowd of diamonds and tuxedos. Her lips parted, her throat dry as dust. When she reached him, her voice barely escaped her mouth, a whisper cutting through the music. "Sir, don't drink it." He looked at her, startled, his brow furrowing at the sight of the cleaner standing so close. She leaned in, her breath trembling. "Don't drink it," she repeated, lower this time, her eyes wide with terror. "There's poison." For the first time all night, Viktor Orlov didn't smile. Viktor's eyes locked on hers, disbelief flickering beneath the cold steel of his expression. For a man accustomed to manipulation, to deals sealed with deceit and smiles, it took only seconds to recognize genuine fear when he saw it. And the woman before him, this cleaner with trembling hands and desperate eyes, was not acting. Her face was pale, her breath shallow, and her voice carried the raw weight of truth. He glanced down at the glass again. The light from the chandelier trembled across its surface, revealing a faint oily gleam that shouldn't have been there. The room suddenly felt suffocating. The laughter that moments ago had filled the air now sounded distant, distorted. He lowered the glass slowly, every movement deliberate, his hand steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "Who told you this?" he muttered under his breath, leaning slightly forward so no one else could hear. Maria's lips quivered. "No one," she whispered. "I saw her. Your wife. She poured something into it when she thought no one was watching. I wasn't supposed to look, but I did." The words struck him harder than he expected. His chest tightened. For a fleeting moment, he wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that Maria had made a mistake, that she was frightened of something else entirely. But deep down, beneath the layers of arrogance and pride, he knew his wife had changed. He had seen it in her eyes, the way she avoided his touch lately, the way her laughter never reached her soul, the quiet resentment she tried to hide behind perfect manners. His gaze flicked across the room. Alina stood near the terrace doors now, her back half turned, laughing too loudly at something a young man in a tailored suit had said. Her hand toyed nervously with the thin chain around her neck. When her eyes met Viktor's for a split second, her smile froze, almost imperceptibly. It was enough. A cold, crawling silence spread through his chest. He set the champagne flute on the table beside him, sliding it just far enough that it looked untouched. Then he straightened, every movement controlled, a mask slipping back over his face. "You did well to tell me," he said quietly to Maria, his voice barely a whisper. His tone was no longer dismissive. It was sharp, calculating, laced with something like gratitude. "Stay near," he added, glancing toward the crowd. "Say nothing." Maria nodded, her heart still pounding. She stepped back, disappearing into the moving sea of glittering gowns and tuxedos. But her eyes stayed fixed on Viktor, watching, waiting. Viktor's mind raced. He thought of his business empire, of the rivals who envied his power, but none of them had access to his home, his table, his glass. Only Alina did. The woman he had once sworn to protect, who had sworn to love him. He remembered the first time he saw her, barely 20, working at a charity gala with that same soft smile that once seemed so pure. He had given her the world, and now that same woman might be trying to take his life. The music swelled again, violins crying softly. Guests mingled around him, oblivious. He watched as Alina began to make her way back toward him, her steps graceful, her face composed. She was beautiful, yes, but now he saw it. The cracks behind her eyes, the faint tremor in her hand as she approached. She smiled sweetly as she reached him. "You haven't touched your drink," she said, her tone light, teasing. "Are you not enjoying the party?" Viktor forced a faint smile, his fingers brushing the rim of the glass. "Oh, I am," he murmured, his gaze unwavering. "But perhaps we should share this one." "You chose it, didn't you?" The color drained subtly from her cheeks. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then she laughed, a thin, brittle sound, and placed her hand over his. "No need," she whispered, "it's yours." And that's when he knew, beyond doubt, that Maria had been right. His mind sharpened like ice. He rose from his chair, his hand still gently clasping hers. "Come, my dear," he said softly, smiling as though nothing were wrong. "Let's take a walk. The air inside feels heavy." She hesitated only for a moment before nodding, her eyes flicking nervously toward the untouched glass. Together, they turned toward the terrace doors. The crowd parted without question, the picture-perfect couple gliding through the room, his hand resting over hers. Behind them, Maria stood by her mop and bucket, her breath caught in her throat. She didn't know what would happen next, only that she had crossed a line no one like her ever dared to cross. And now, the night was holding its breath with her. The night air was cool and sharp, carrying the scent of roses from the garden below. The noise of the party faded behind them, replaced by the whisper of leaves and the faint hum of city lights in the distance. Viktor and Alina stepped out onto the marble terrace, the moon casting a pale shimmer over their faces. For a few long seconds neither spoke. The silence between them felt heavy, stretched thin like glass about to shatter. Alina turned first, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, trying to maintain her composure. "You seem distant tonight," she said softly, her voice steady but her eyes avoiding his. "Did something happen?" Viktor looked at her for a long time, studying her face, every twitch and tremor. Once he might have reached out to comfort her. Now, all he saw was calculation behind her tenderness. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Tell me, Alina," he said quietly, "how long have you been planning it?" Her eyes snapped up to his, wide with surprise, too wide, too deliberate. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her tone rising slightly, feigned confusion trembling at the edges. He smiled faintly, coldly. "The drink," he said, nodding toward the open doors where the champagne glass still sat untouched on the table inside. "The one you chose so carefully for me. The one you didn't want to share." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She took a small step back, her heels clicking against the marble. "You're tired," she whispered. "Ugh. You're imagining things. You've been working too much." He cut her off. "Maria saw you," he said simply. "The cleaner. She saw you pour something into my glass when you thought no one was watching." The name hit her like a slap. Her breath faltered. For an instant, she looked toward the ballroom, toward the crowd that still danced and laughed inside, unaware of the truth unraveling just beyond the doors. Her hands began to shake. "She's lying," Alina said finally, her voice breaking. "She's jealous. She wants to ruin us." Viktor took another step forward, his shadow swallowing hers. "Jealous?" he repeated quietly. "A woman who cleans floors until her hands bleed. What could she possibly gain from saving my life?" Her lips trembled and she looked down, unable to meet his gaze. "I didn't mean to," she whispered at last, her voice cracking. "I didn't want to do it, but I couldn't. I couldn't live like this anymore. You don't know what it's like being trapped, being watched every minute." Viktor's expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. "Trapped," he repeated softly, almost to himself. "And your solution was to kill me?" Her knees buckled slightly, tears filling her eyes. "It was supposed to be quick," she choked out. "I thought, if I could just be free." The sound of approaching footsteps cut her off. Security guards appeared at the doorway, alerted by a silent signal Viktor had sent moments earlier. The music inside came to an abrupt stop as a ripple of confusion spread through the guests. Alina turned to run, but one of the guards caught her arm, holding her gently but firmly. She began to scream, not with rage but with despair, her voice echoing across the terrace. "I didn't mean it. I swear I didn't mean it." Viktor stood motionless as they led her away. Her sobs faded into the night until there was only silence again, the kind that sinks deep and leaves a scar. Inside, the guests whispered, eyes wide, glasses half raised in disbelief. No one noticed the woman standing near the corner, still in her gray uniform, her hands trembling around the handle of her mop. Maria watched quietly as Alina disappeared, her face pale but steady. Viktor looked up then, his gaze finding Maria across the room. For the first time, their eyes met not as master and servant, but as two people bound by something unspoken. He nodded once, small, solemn, a gesture of acknowledgement and gratitude. Maria's throat tightened. She didn't smile, didn't bow. She just nodded back silently before returning to her work, disappearing once more into the shadows that had always hidden her. And as the night wore on, the chandeliers kept shining, the music started again, and the world of the rich pretended nothing had happened. But for Viktor, every sparkle in his glass would forever remind him of a whisper that had saved his life, and the unseen woman who had dared to speak it.